The saddlebag sat on Ellen Harper's porch like a confession she had not been asked to hear. She had found it at first light, when the eastern sky was still bruised purple and the roosters had only just begun to argue with the dawn. It was old leather, cracked at the seams and darkened by years of hard riding, cinched shut with a brass buckle that bore the initials BM pressed into the metal. No note, no name, no explanation whatsoever. Just the bag, set down as deliberately as a man sets a stone on a grave, and the soft impression of boot prints in the dust of her porch steps that told her whoever had left it had stood there for a long time before walking away. Her hands were shaking when she reached for it. Ellen Harper was not a woman given to shaking. She had buried a husband at 24, held her family's failing cattle operation together with nothing but stubbornness and a worn-out ledger, and faced down the county assessor 3 times without blinking. She was 27 years old, 5 feet and 4 inches of sun-brown determination, with dark hair that she kept pinned back because she did not have time for it to be anything other than practical. She did not shake, but she shook now, because she recognized those initials, B.M. Benjamin Merritt, the most wanted outlaw in the whole of New Mexico Territory as of the year 1883. A man whose name the newspapers in Santa Fe printed alongside words like dangerous and ruthless and cold-blooded, and whose face had appeared on reward posters across 3 counties for the past 2 years. A man she had known once in a way that had cost her considerably more than she liked to admit, even to herself. She had told herself she was done with Benjamin Merritt 6 months ago, when the last rumor of him had passed through Cimarron like a cold wind, and she had closed her window against it and gone back to her chores. And now his saddlebag was on her porch. She pulled open the brass buckle. What she found inside did not belong to an outlaw. There were letters, a thick stack of them tied with a piece of rawhide cord, all addressed in handwriting she did not recognize to a man named Thomas Aldridge of the First National Bank of Cimarron. There was a ledger, similar to hers but filled with columns of figures in a tight, careful hand. There was a Wells Fargo transfer document, signed and notarized, for a sum that made her breath stop in her chest. And there was something else, tucked beneath everything, wrapped in oilcloth and tied carefully shut. She unwrapped it with fingers that had gone cold despite the warming morning. It was a photograph, studio-made, printed on thick cardstock. A man and a woman, posed and formal the way people are when they know the image will outlast them. The woman she did not know. The man she knew with every bone in her body. Benjamin Merritt, younger, unsmiling, but alive and whole and looking into the camera lens with those gray eyes that had haunted her sleep for the better part of a year. On the back of the photograph, in that same careful handwriting from the letters, were 4 words: "She is not safe." Ellen Harper set the photograph down on her kitchen table, looked at it for exactly 30 seconds, and then went to saddle her mare. She would think about what it meant to be a fool later. Right now, there was no time. The story of how Benjamin Merritt's saddlebag had ended up on her porch began, as most things in Ellen Harper's life had begun, with necessity. 6 months earlier, in the October of 1882, Ellen's cattle operation had been on the edge of collapse. Her late husband, Gerald Harper, had left her the land and the deed, and a set of debts that he had kept carefully hidden from her during their 3 years of marriage. Gerald had been a charming man, generous with his smile and stingy with his honesty, and when the fever took him in the spring of 1882, Ellen had discovered that the ranch she believed they owned was mortgaged twice over to Thomas Aldridge at the First National Bank of Cimarron. Thomas Aldridge was not the kind of banker who worked with grieving widows. He was a compact, soft-handed man in his 50s who wore Eastern suits and spoke in the polished tones of someone who had spent considerable energy becoming something he was not born to be. He had given Ellen 3 months to begin repaying the debt at a rate that she immediately understood was designed to be impossible. If she failed, the land reverted to the bank, and the bank, everyone in Cimarron seemed to understand without saying it directly, would then sell it to the Callaway Cattle Company, which was currently in the process of consolidating most of the grazing land in that part of the territory. Ellen had spent October making desperate calculations at her kitchen table and arriving at the same answer every time. She could not make the payment. It was on a Tuesday in the middle of October that she had ridden into Cimarron for supplies and had her horse's shoe come loose on the main street. She had been crouching in the dust beside the animal, trying to assess the damage with practical eyes, when a voice above her had said, quietly and without preamble, "The nail's still seated. You can make it to the farrier if you go easy." She had looked up. Benjamin Merritt had been standing 2 feet away, holding his own horse's reins with one hand and a pair of saddlebags slung over his shoulder. He was tall, broader through the shoulders than she had expected from the wanted posters, with dark hair that had grown past his collar and a jaw that had not met a razor in several days. His eyes were the color of January sky, pale and clear and more careful than she had anticipated. He was wearing a long coat that had seen better years, and there was nothing about him that announced itself as dangerous. She had said, "I know how a shoe sits, thank you." He had almost smiled. "I know you do. I was making conversation." She had stood up and looked at him for a long moment, measuring. "You are Benjamin Merritt." He had not flinched. "And you are Ellen Harper. Your husband owed Thomas Aldridge $4,000 and died before he paid it. You have until the 1st of January to produce the first installment or you lose the land." She had stared at him. "How do you know that?" He had looked at her with those January eyes and said, simply, "Because Thomas Aldridge is the reason I am in Cimarron, and I make it my business to know everything about Thomas Aldridge." That conversation, conducted in the middle of the dusty main street of Cimarron with her horse's loose shoe between them, was where it had begun. Ellen had not trusted him. She would have been a spectacular fool to trust him, and she was not a fool. She had listened to him for exactly long enough to understand that he was offering her information about Aldridge that she could not get any other way, and she had offered him nothing in return except the use of her barn for a single night, when he told her that the sheriff's deputy had been following him for 2 days. It had seemed, at the time, like an entirely practical and unemotional transaction. What she had not anticipated was that Benjamin Merritt, wanted outlaw and man of no fixed address, would sit at her kitchen table that evening and drink the coffee she put in front of him, and talk to her for 3 hours with more directness and intelligence than anyone had spoken to her in the 2 years she had been married to Gerald Harper. He had told her about Aldridge. Not everything, she understood even then, but enough. Thomas Aldridge, it appeared, had built his banking business on a foundation of fraud that ran back 15 years and involved land titles that had been altered, mortgage documents that had been manufactured, and a relationship with the Callaway Cattle Company that was considerably closer than he let on publicly. Aldridge, in Benjamin's telling, was not a banker who had accidentally lent money to a woman whose husband lied to her. He had specifically targeted vulnerable properties, created the conditions for default, and then arranged the land transfers to Callaway in exchange for a percentage that he kept in a separate account in Santa Fe. Ellen had listened to all of this with her hands wrapped around her coffee cup and her eyes on Benjamin Merritt's face, reading him the way she read the sky before a storm, looking for deception. She had found something else. He had been angry, telling her this. Not the loud, table-striking kind of angry that men performed when they wanted to seem serious. The quiet kind. The kind that lived behind a man's eyes and in the set of his jaw, the kind that had been burning for a long time and had learned to burn without visible smoke. "Why do you care about Aldridge?" she had asked him when he paused. He had been quiet for a moment. Then he had said, "My brother had a ranch outside of Mora. 2 years ago, Aldridge arranged a loan for him to expand. 6 months later, there was a problem with the original deed, a problem that Aldridge manufactured and the bank foreclosed. My brother lost everything. He died the following winter. He had said it flatly, without decoration, and the flatness of it had told her more than grief would have. He had a wife and 2 daughters. They are in Santa Fe now, living on charity." Ellen had looked at her coffee cup. "I am sorry." "I am going to do something about it," he had said. She had not asked what. She had understood, with a certainty that surprised her, that he intended something specific and dangerous, and that asking for the details would put her in a position she did not want to be in. So she had not asked, and he had not told her, and in the morning he had been gone from her barn, and the only evidence that he had been there was a small stack of firewood that he had split and stacked by the barn door at some point in the night. She had stood looking at that firewood for a long moment. Then she had gone back to her calculations. Over the following weeks, Benjamin Merritt had appeared at her property 4 more times, always after dark, always brief. He brought her information each time, specific and actionable, about Aldridge's financial operations. He told her which documents in the bank's files could be used to demonstrate the fraud, where Aldridge had made the kinds of mistakes that left legal traces. He told her the name of a territorial judge in Santa Fe, a man named Horace Cray, who had been quietly building a case against Calloway for separate reasons, and who would be very interested in what Ellen could tell him. Each time she had given him coffee and whatever food she had on the stove, and they had talked about Aldridge and about the territory and about things that had nothing to do with either. He told her he had grown up in Missouri, near a town called Lexington, on a small farm with his parents and his brother Samuel. He had come west in 1876 at the age of 22, looking for work, and had found instead the particular education that the frontier provided to young men without money or connections. He told her this without self-pity and without false bravado, which she found she appreciated. She told him about growing up in Kansas, about coming to New Mexico territory with Gerald Harper in 1879, because Gerald had believed, with the enthusiastic certainty of a man who had never worked land in his life, that he was going to build something. She told him about the first year, which had been genuinely hopeful, and about the way hope had slowly become something quieter and more complicated as the realities of the land and of Gerald's character had both become clearer. She told him about finding the ledgers after Gerald died, about the specific quality of fury and grief that came from discovering that the man you had mourned was also the man who had been deceiving you. Benjamin had listened to all of this with the same focused attention he brought to everything, and had said, when she finished, "You are going to be all right, Ellen Harper." She had looked at him sharply because she had not been sure whether he was making her a promise or simply making an observation. The difference mattered. "That is not something you can know," she had said. "No," he had agreed. "But I know what I know about the territory judge, and I know what the documents in Aldridge's file say, and I know that you are the kind of woman who will use every tool available to her, so I am comfortable saying it." She had felt something shift in her chest at that, something she had been careful not to examine too closely in the weeks that followed. By November, she had made contact with Judge Horace Cray through a letter that Benjamin had told her how to write. By December, the judge's investigator had come to Cimarron and spent 2 days reviewing documents that Ellen had been able to identify and access through means that involved Benjamin's very specific and technically illegal knowledge of the bank's back-office filing procedures. By the 23rd of December, the judge had issued a temporary injunction preventing the foreclosure on Ellen's property pending investigation of the bank's conduct. She had read the injunction 3 times by lamplight, and then sat at her kitchen table and put her face in her hands and cried, briefly and thoroughly, for the first time since Gerald's funeral. When she raised her head, she had realized that she had reached for her coffee cup with the thought that she wished Benjamin were sitting across the table from her. That was the moment she had understood that the thing she had not been examining closely was, in fact, exactly what she had feared it was. She had not seen him for 3 weeks by then. He had last appeared on the 2nd of December, with news about the judge's investigator, and had stayed longer than usual, until nearly midnight, sitting by her stove and talking about nothing important with an ease that felt, to Ellen, like something that had been earned over months of careful approach. Before he left, he had stood in her doorway and looked at her for a moment with those gray eyes, and she had looked back, and neither of them had said the thing that was plainly in the air between them. He had said good night and walked into the darkness. She had told herself, in January and February of 1883, that it was for the best. He was a wanted man. Whatever his reasons, whatever the justice or injustice of how he had come to be what he was a man with a price on his head who could not stay in one place. She was a woman with land and debts and a future that required stability. The arithmetic was obvious. She had believed she was over the wanting of him by March. Then came April and the saddlebag on her porch and the 4 words on the back of a photograph. She is not safe. Ellen rode west out of her property at a pace that was slightly faster than prudent, on her bay mare Rosie, who was 7 years old and steady and accustomed to her rider's urgency. Ellen had packed quickly and practically. Food for several days, her father's old Colt Navy revolver converted to take metallic cartridges, a blanket roll, and the contents of the saddlebag itself, which she had repacked and slung across Rosie's back beside her own kit. She had written a note for her neighbor, Dorothea Vance, who she knew would look after her property. She had not written what she was doing or where she was going because she did not fully know the answer to either question. What she knew was this: the letters in the saddlebag were addressed to Thomas Aldridge. The ledger in the saddlebag recorded payments that appeared to be bribes, paid to a deputy sheriff named Calhoun and to 2 men she did not recognize. The Wells Fargo transfer document moved a substantial sum from an account in Aldridge's name to an account in Santa Fe that she suspected was connected to Callaway. And the woman in the photograph was, if she understood correctly what the 4 words on the back meant, in danger. She is not safe. She had thought about it for 30 seconds before saddling up. If she was reading the situation correctly, Benjamin had gathered evidence against Aldridge, substantial enough evidence to finish what the judge's investigation had begun. He had brought that evidence to her porch. That meant either that he could not bring it himself, which meant he was in trouble, or that he wanted her to have it as protection, which also meant he was in trouble. Either way, she was not going to sit at her kitchen table and wait to find out which. She knew, from his visits in October and November, the places he had mentioned casually as landmarks of his movements through the territory. She knew he had spoken of the Rayado Canyon area as good cover, of a particular ridge line west of the Canadian River as a place he had camped repeatedly. She knew his patterns the way you know the patterns of someone you have listened to carefully for months, storing details you told yourself you were storing for purely practical reasons. She rode west. The New Mexico Territory in April 1883 was a landscape that could stop your heart if you let it. The sky was enormous and purely blue, the kind of blue that seems painted on from the inside rather than seen from the outside. The high desert bloomed with things that had no business being beautiful in such dry country: cholla cactus and desert marigold, and the pale purple of verbena spreading across the sandy ground like rumors. The Cimarron Range cut the western horizon in dark serrated lines, and the air at elevation had a clarity that made distances deceptive, so that mountains that looked close took a full day to reach. Ellen did not stop to appreciate any of it, but she was aware of it the way you are aware of familiar music in the background of a difficult conversation. She had been riding for 4 hours, roughly northwest from her property, when she spotted the rider. He appeared on a ridge line to her left, silhouetted against the afternoon sky, sitting very still on a dark horse. She kept riding at the same pace, not showing any reaction, but her hand moved to where the revolver sat in the saddlebag closest to her right hand. She had learned in the past year to trust her instincts about stillness. A rider who is simply traveling does not sit that still on a ridge. The rider came down toward her at an angle, unhurried, and she kept her pace and her face neutral, and when he was close enough that she could see his features, she recognized him as the deputy she had seen in Cimarron, the one named Calhoun whose name had appeared in the ledger. He was a large man with a flat, pale face and eyes set close together above a nose that had been broken at least once. He wore his sheriff's star as if it were currency, displayed rather than worn, and he reined his horse alongside hers without being invited. "Mrs. Harper," he said, in a tone that was cordial in the same way a locked door is cordial. "Bit far from home, aren't you?" "I am visiting a friend," she said. "That right." He was looking at the saddlebags across Rosie's flanks, not casually. Looking with the specific attention of someone who is looking for a particular thing. "Funny thing. Man named Benjamin Merritt was seen near your property last night. You know that name?" "I have seen his poster," she said. "Course you have. Dangerous man. Wanted in connection with robbery and assault, plus he has been interfering in legal banking matters, which is a federal offense as of last November." He said this as if reading from a notice, which she suspected was approximately what he was doing. If a person were to be harboring him or helping him in any way, that person would be in serious legal difficulty. "Then it is fortunate I am simply visiting a friend," Ellen said. He studied her for a moment. Then he smiled, and the smile was not pleasant. "You have a good day, Mrs. Harper." He turned his horse and rode back the way he had come, which was not towards Cimarron. She waited until he was out of sight over the ridge, then changed her direction slightly, angling more directly north than she had been riding. If Calhoun was watching her, she did not want to lead him to wherever Benjamin was. If Benjamin had left the bag on her porch and gone to ground somewhere, the last thing she wanted was to help a corrupt deputy sheriff find him. She rode for another 2 hours, working her way into the rougher terrain north of the river, where the land broke up into arroyos and rock formations that made tracking difficult. The sun was getting low, and she was thinking about stopping for the night when she heard it, the sound of a horse, moving fast, approaching from the east. She pulled Rosie behind a large boulder and waited, her hand on the revolver. The rider came into view, moving at a hard trot, and she recognized the shape of him before she could see his face. The breadth of those shoulders, the particular set of his head. She had, it appeared, been storing that information too. "Benjamin," she called. He pulled his horse up so sharply that the animal spun, front hooves lifting, and he had his own gun drawn and leveled at her position before she had fully finished saying his name. Then he saw her, and his whole body changed, the weapon going down, the tension in his posture shifting into something she could not immediately name. "Ellen," he said, and then immediately after, with a force behind it that surprised her, "What are you doing here? You need to go back." She came out from behind the boulder and walked Rosie forward. "You left your saddlebag on my porch," she said. "Without a note. I read what was in it, and I am here. Would you like to explain what is happening, or shall we just have an argument about whether I should be here?" He stared at her. Then he looked around at the terrain with the quick, habitual scan of someone who does his threat assessment automatically. "How did you get past Calhoun?" "He found me on the road. I told him I was visiting a friend." "He'll be watching." "I know. I changed direction and came north. If he followed me, I lost him in the canyon." Benjamin looked at her for a long, complicated moment. The evening light was making everything amber and deep, and it caught the angles of his face in a way that made him look simultaneously exhausted and intensely present. There was a cut above his left eyebrow that had bled and dried, and his coat had a tear at the shoulder seam that was new. "You are infuriating," he said. "I have been told," she said. "Who is the woman in the photograph?" He was quiet. "Benjamin, who is she?" He exhaled, slow and deliberate, like a man making a decision. "Her name is Clara Voss. She was my brother Samuel's wife." Ellen absorbed this. "Your sister-in-law?" "Yes. She is in Cimarron. I did not know until 10 days ago. She came back from Santa Fe because someone told her there was money owed to Samuel's estate from the bank, a story that Aldridge manufactured specifically to get her back to Cimarron." He paused. "Because she is a witness." She knows things about the original transaction between Samuel and Aldridge, things she told me before Samuel died, things that would corroborate everything in that ledger. Aldridge knows she knows. If he gets to her before the judge's investigator does, she disappears. These things happen in this territory. You know that. She needs to get to Santa Fe, Ellen said. Yes. And I cannot get her there because every deputy in the county is looking for me, including the ones Aldridge is paying directly. And because if I try to ride into Cimarron, I will be arrested or shot before I get to the hotel where she is staying. He looked at her. I left that bag on your porch because I did not have another option. I need someone who can move through Cimarron without attracting that kind of attention. I need someone the judge's investigator will trust. I need the documents in that bag to get to Santa Fe. He stopped. Then he said more quietly, I need you. The last two words sat between them in the evening air. Ellen looked at him steadily. All right, she said. All right. Yes. I will go to Cimarron and find Clara Voss and get her to Santa Fe. Tell me what I need to know. He looked at her as if she had said something in a language he was still translating. Then something in his face changed, a careful, guarded man briefly becoming something more open than she had seen before. Ellen, this is dangerous. Calhoun is not just a corrupt deputy. He has hurt people. I know what the territory is, she said. Tell me what I need to know. He told her. They camped that night in a narrow arroyo that offered good cover and a small fire that could not be seen from more than 20 yards. Benjamin made coffee in a battered tin pot, and they sat across from each other in the firelight, the way they had sat in her kitchen on those November nights. And he told her everything about Clara Voss, and about Aldridge's scheme, and about what the judge's investigator, a man named Wilson, was prepared to do if he received the documents in the saddlebag. Ellen listened and asked sharp, specific questions, and he answered them with the same directness she remembered, never condescending, never flinching from the difficult parts. He told her that Aldridge had realized the investigation was closing in and had become desperate. Desperate men in the territory expressed their desperation violently. 2 men who had worked for Benjamin in gathering evidence had disappeared in the past month. Are they dead? She asked. One of them, yes. The other I am not sure about. She was quiet for a moment. And you, what are you going to do while I go to Cimarron? He picked up a stick and turned it in the fire. I am going to draw Calhoun and his men north, away from town. Give you and Clara a clear road to Santa Fe. That sounds like a way to get yourself killed. It sounds like a distraction, he said. Benjamin. He looked at her across the fire and she held his gaze, and the thing that had been in the air between them since October was there again, larger than before, less possible to pretend was not there. I have been doing this for 2 years, he said quietly. I am still here. That is not the same as saying it is not dangerous. No, he agreed. It is not. She wanted to say something else. She had several things she wanted to say. Things that had been accumulating since December when she had sat at her kitchen table and understood what she was feeling and decided to put it away. She did not say any of them, because the situation was not one that invited the luxury of saying difficult true things without knowing whether you would both be alive the next day to live with the consequences. Instead she said, "Show me on a map where Clara Voss is staying." He drew her a map in the dirt by the firelight, detailed and clear, marking the hotel, the bank, the sheriff's office, and the routes out of town that avoided Calloway's riders. She memorized it with the focused attention she gave to important information, and when she was satisfied she smoothed the dirt over the map with her boot. "Get some sleep," she said. "I will take first watch." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she could not fully read in the firelight. Then he said, "Thank you, Ellen." "I have not done anything yet," she said. "Yes, you have," he said, and lay down and closed his eyes. She sat with the fire and the darkness and the sound of the high desert at night, which was not silent but full of small, urgent life, and she looked at his sleeping face and permitted herself, for exactly as long as it took to look and turn away, to understand fully what she felt. Then she turned away and watched the dark. She rode into Cimarron the next morning at a time calculated to look unremarkable. The town was awake but not yet fully alive, the saloon still quiet, the main street occupied by a freight wagon and two men talking outside the general store. She rode with her back straight and her face arranged in the specific expression of a woman who has errands to run, and the mild irritation of someone who has been riding since before breakfast. The hotel was called the Territorial House, which was a name that aspired to grandeur it had not quite achieved. It was a two-story wooden building with a fresh coat of white paint that had already begun to peel on the southern face, and a veranda on the upper floor that looked out over the street. Ellen tied Rosie at the hitching post and went inside with the saddlebag. The desk clerk was a young man with an earnest face who told her, when she asked for Clara Voss, that Mrs. Voss was in room 7 on the upper floor. He said this with the slightly guilty air of someone who has been told not to say it, and has said it anyway to a woman who asked in a particular tone of confident expectation, and Ellen thanked him pleasantly and went upstairs. She knocked on the door of room 7. A long pause, then a voice careful and quiet, "Who is there?" "My name is Ellen Harper," she said, keeping her voice low. "I have something from Benjamin Merritt." The door opened on a chain first, and an eye appeared in the gap. Then the chain rattled off and the door opened. Clara Voss was perhaps 30 years old, a slight woman with dark eyes and fair skin, and the particular look of someone who has been frightened for long enough that it has become her resting expression. She was dressed and clearly had not slept, and she was holding a small pocket pistol in her right hand that she had not bothered to hide. "Come in," she said, quickly. Ellen came in and the door closed behind her, and Clara Voss looked at the saddlebag and then at Ellen's face. "He is all right," she said. "He is alive," Ellen said, because that was the most honest answer she had. "Need to get you to Santa Fe today if we can manage it." Clara sat down on the edge of the bed. "Aldridge's man came to this hotel yesterday afternoon. He sat in the lobby for 4 hours. Calhoun. No, someone else, younger. He left in the evening, but I do not think he went far." She paused. "Samuel would be appalled that I am in this position. He always thought I should not have married an optimist." She said this with a brief, complicated smile. "Tell me about that later," Ellen said. "Right now I need to know how much of your belongings you can leave behind." "Everything," Clara said, without hesitation. Ellen nodded. She liked Clara Voss. The problem with leaving Cimarron quickly and unobserved was that there was no route out of town that could not be watched by one man stationed in the right place. Ellen had understood this from Benjamin's dirt map the night before, and she had been thinking about it on the ride in. There was only one direction that Aldridge's watcher would not expect, which was that she and Clara would leave openly, through the main street, as two women making an unremarkable departure. The trick was making it unremarkable. She left Clara in the room and went back down to the hotel kitchen, where a cook named Maria was starting the breakfast preparations. Ellen had a conversation with Maria that involved specific quantities of cash from the emergency fund she had brought, and when she came back upstairs, she was carrying 2 canvas bags of food supplies that could plausibly explain why 2 women were loading up a horse. She collected Clara and they went downstairs and out the front door and across the street to the general store, where Ellen bought a second horse, a solid roan gelding that she paid cash for from the same emergency fund, explaining to the storekeeper that she needed an animal for her friend who was returning to Santa Fe. All of this was conducted in the bright open air of the morning street, in full view of anyone watching, with the brisk efficiency of women who have things to do and no time to be suspicious. The man watching from the corner of the saloon followed them with his eyes but did not move. Ellen had calculated that he would not move unless they rode for the edge of town, at which point he would send word to Calhoun and the trap would close. So they did not ride for the edge of town immediately. They rode to the church at the north end of Main Street, where Ellen knew the minister, a reliable man named Pastor Hollies, would be doing his morning preparation. She had not planned this part in detail, but she had understood from Benjamin's description of the towns, layout that the churchyard backed up against the road that ran northeast, and that there was a gate in the churchyard wall. Pastor Hollis, to his considerable credit, asked no questions at all when Ellen told him that she needed to use the churchyard and the back gate, and that she was helping a woman in some trouble get safely out of town. He simply unlocked the gate and returned to his Bible, which Ellen felt was an exemplary response. They rode out through the churchyard at a walk, quiet as the morning, and by the time the man on the saloon corner realized they had not come back around the north end of Main Street, they were 2 miles out of Cimarron on the northeast road and moving at a pace that the solid roan gelding was handling without complaint. "That was very clever," Clara said, riding beside her. "It was improvised," Ellen said honestly. "The clever parts are still ahead of us." They rode hard and northeast and then east and south, describing an arc that took them away from the direct Santa Fe route, where Calhoun's riders would logically look, aiming instead for the longer road through Wagon Mound that added time but offered better odds of arriving. Ellen navigated by landmarks she had learned from Benjamin's descriptions and from her own years of moving through this territory, and Clara Voss rode without complaint and with a competence on horseback that Ellen appreciated immediately. They talked as they rode, because talking made the miles pass, and because Ellen found Clara's story both devastating and illuminating in ways that clarified everything Benjamin had told her. Clara told her about Samuel Merritt, about the ranch outside of Mora, about how the loan from Aldridge had seemed like salvation and had been instead a mechanism. She told it with the particular precision of a woman who has had time to understand exactly how she was deceived, which is a different and more painful understanding than not knowing. She told Ellen that she had documents of her own, letters Samuel had saved from his dealings with Aldridge, which she had brought from Santa Fe because she had not trusted them out of her possession. She told Ellen about Benjamin, about how he had come to Mora after Samuel's death and found her and the girls in circumstances that no one should be in, and had given her every dollar he possessed, which had been approximately $60. About how he had sat with her at her table, as Ellen would understand a man sitting at a kitchen table, and told her that he was going to find a way to make it right. About how she had watched him become the kind of man the law pursued across 3 counties, and had understood that he was not pursuing theft or violence for their own sake, but with a terrible, focused purpose. "He thinks he has failed Samuel," Clara said. "Even now, even with everything he has gathered, he carries it the way some men carry a wound that will not heal." Ellen was quiet for a moment. "He told me about Samuel. Did he tell you that Samuel was the one who taught him to ride?" Clara said, "That Samuel was 8 years older than Benjamin and essentially raised him after their father left. That the reason Benjamin came west in the first place was because Samuel had come west first and Benjamin followed him because Benjamin has never been able to do anything other than go where Samuel was." She paused. "He does not talk about that." "No," Ellen said. "He did not tell me that." "He would not," Clara said. "He does not talk about the things that hurt the most. He talks around them." Ellen thought about November nights in her kitchen, about the things Benjamin had said and the things he had talked around. "He talks around everything that matters," Clara said, "except when he cannot anymore. Then he says it very plainly and then never speaks of it again." She looked at Ellen with her dark, perceptive eyes. "Has he said anything very plain to you?" Ellen looked at the road ahead. "Not yet," she said. They reached Wagon Mound on the second evening, exhausted and saddle-sore, and found a room at the single boarding house in town operated by a widow named Mrs. Pacheco, who fed them beans and cornbread and asked no questions. Ellen wrote a letter to Judge Horace Cray's investigator in Santa Fe, explaining the situation and the contents of the saddlebag, and paid Mrs. Pacheco's son, a reliable-looking boy of about 12, to carry it to the telegraph office first thing in the morning with urgent instructions. They were 3 days from Santa Fe by easy stages, 2 if they pushed, On the afternoon of the second day out of Wagon Mound, with Santa Fe's high-altitude light beginning to show in the quality of the sky, Ellen heard riders behind them. She did not look back. She kept her face forward and her pace steady and said to Clara in a conversational tone that she pitched carefully, "There are riders behind us. Do not turn around." Clara kept her eyes forward. "How many?" Ellen had counted the hoofbeats as best she could in the stony terrain. 3. Moving to close the gap but not yet running. They want to approach without alarming us. Calhoun's men? Possibly. Possibly someone Aldridge hired separately. She considered her options with the same cold clarity she brought to reading ledgers. We are 40 minutes from Santa Fe. If we run and they run, we will not make it on these horses in this terrain. If we stop and face them, we have the element of preparation. We also have 2 against 3, Clara said. We also have the documents, Ellen said, which they want more than they want us. She thought quickly. If they can get the documents, they have reason to stop. If the documents are already on their way to the judge, they have no reason to stop, and several reasons to ensure we cannot talk. Clara reached into her coat and took out her pocket pistol. She checked the cylinder with the efficiency of a woman who has done it before. "I have 4 rounds," she said. "I have 6, Ellen said. She thought for another second. "Pull up here." They reined in at a place where the road narrowed between 2 outcroppings of red rock that forced anyone approaching from behind to come through in single file. Ellen dismounted and tied both horses to a mesquite bush set back from the road. She positioned herself behind the left outcropping with the revolver in her hand and told Clara to take the right. The 3 riders came around the bend in the road and pulled up sharply when they found themselves looking at empty horses and an empty road. The hesitation lasted about 4 seconds, which was enough. "Drop the weapons," Ellen said, from behind her rock, in the clearest and most carry-through-the-air voice she possessed. "I have a Colt Navy and I am an acceptable shot. The woman across the road is a better one. The documents you want are not on these horses. They are already with Judge Cray's investigator in Santa Fe. There is nothing here worth dying for." A silence. She had calculated that corrupt men hired for a specific job would, on balance, not want to die for it. She had calculated that the documents being gone removed their primary reason for violence. She had calculated that 2 women who sounded this certain behind rocks in a narrow pass were worth taking seriously. She had calculated correctly. The 3 riders exchanged a look she could not see from behind her rock but could estimate from the silence. Then the one in front said, "This isn't finished," with the sullen quality of a man who is leaving because the math has changed, not because he has decided to be reasonable. "It is finished for today," Ellen said. "Ride back the way you came." They rode back. She waited until the sound of hooves had faded completely, then came out from behind the rock on legs that were steadier than she felt internally. Clara emerged from the other side, and they looked at each other across the road. "You said the documents are already with the investigator," Clara said. "I sent the letter from Wagon Mound," Ellen said. "I described the contents in enough detail that the investigator can begin regardless of whether the physical documents arrive." It was not a lie. It was an early truth. Clara looked at her for a moment. Then she began to laugh, brief and genuine, the laugh of a woman who has been frightened for a long time and has found, unexpectedly, something to laugh about. They rode into Santa Fe in the late afternoon of that day, with the adobe buildings golden in the slanting light and the smell of pinon smoke in the air, and they went directly to the office of Judge Horace Cray's Territorial Investigative Office, where a man named Wilson met them at the door as if he had been expecting them, which he had. Wilson was a compact man in his late 40s with a gray beard and reading spectacles, and the manner of someone who has spent 30 years in territorial law and has therefore seen everything and is surprised by nothing. He took the saddlebag from Ellen and opened it with the careful hands of a professional and looked at its contents for approximately 90 seconds before looking up at her with an expression of controlled but genuine intensity. "Where did these come from?" he said. "Benjamin Merritt gathered them over 2 years," she said. "He left them in my care." Wilson looked at her over his spectacles. "Mrs. Harper, I have your letter of this morning. You understand the position this puts you in, being associated with Merritt." "I understand it perfectly," she said. "I also understand that those documents represent 2 years of a man's life spent building a case against Thomas Aldridge, and that Aldridge has been engaged in systematic fraud that has destroyed multiple families in this territory, and that the law in Cimarron has been at least partially purchased by the man you are investigating. I understand all of that. What I would like to understand from you is what you intend to do about it." Wilson looked at her for another moment. Then he almost smiled. "Sit down, Mrs. Harper, both of you. We have a great deal to discuss." They spent the next 3 hours in Wilson's office, going through the documents in the saddlebag and Clara's letters and Clara's formal statement, which Wilson took down in writing with a clerk's precision. By the time it was dark outside, Wilson had enough to move forward on the federal charges against Aldridge, and he told them so with the specific satisfaction of a man who has been building toward something for a long time. "What about Benjamin Merritt?" Ellen asked. She had been waiting through the entire 3 hours to ask it. Wilson looked at her carefully. "What about him?" "He gathered all of this evidence," she said. "He has been pursuing this case for 2 years at considerable personal risk. His brother's family was defrauded. He deserves consideration." "He is a wanted man," Wilson said. "He is a man who wanted justice for his brother," she said. "If the methods he used to obtain these documents are legally complicated, that is a conversation worth having. But those documents exist because he existed, and that should matter." Wilson was quiet for a long moment. "I cannot promise anything tonight, Mrs. Harper. What I can tell you is that the federal charge against Merritt was filed by Aldridge's own attorney, and that if we are in the process of charging Aldridge, the credibility of that filing becomes considerably more complicated." He paused. "Where is Merritt now?" "I do not know," she said. It was true. She had not known since she rode away from their camp in the arroyo 3 days ago, and the not knowing had been a steady, low current of anxiety beneath everything else she had been doing. "If he presents himself to me voluntarily," Wilson said, "I will hear him." She nodded and filed that away. They stayed in Santa Fe for 3 days, during which Wilson moved with the focused speed of a federal investigator who finally has what he needs. Thomas Aldridge was arrested in Cimarron on the 2nd day, brought in by federal deputies rather than local ones, which was a decision Wilson had made deliberately given the questions about Calhoun. The arrest was a significant event in Cimarron, the kind of event that a small territorial town talks about for years, and the word reached Santa Fe by telegraph before the evening of the arrest day. Deputy Calhoun, when confronted by federal deputies with specific questions about the ledger entries bearing his name, made a series of decisions that combined to constitute a full confession. This was surprising but useful. The Callaway Cattle Company's connection to Aldridge became public on the 3rd day, through a territorial newspaper report that Wilson had clearly not discouraged. The company's lawyers arrived in Santa Fe, and the conversations that followed were the kind that take place when powerful men understand that the alternative to conversation is prosecution. Clara Voss was housed with a respectable Santa Fe family that Wilson knew, and her daughters were sent for from their current situation, and Ellen watched Clara receive her girls on the 2nd afternoon and had to look away from the sight of it because it was almost too much to witness directly. Through all of this, Ellen waited for word of Benjamin Merritt. On the evening of the 3rd day, she was sitting on the portal of the hotel where she was staying, watching the Santa Fe Plaza settle into its evening routine, when she heard footsteps behind her and turned. He looked worse than when she had seen him in the arroyo. There was an older bruise on his jaw, and he was walking with the careful tread of a man who has a rib or two that are not entirely happy, and his coat was gone and his shirt was dusty, and he had 3 days of additional beard. He also looked, she thought, more fully present than she had ever seen him, as if some particular weight had shifted. He stopped when he saw her, and they looked at each other for a moment across the portal. "You made it," he said. "Obviously," she said. "You look terrible." "I have looked worse. Is that your considered medical opinion?" He came and sat in the chair beside her, moving carefully in the way of a man with unhappy ribs, and they sat in the evening light of the Santa Fe Plaza, and she told him everything that had happened, from Cimarron to the riders on the road to Wilson's office. She told it plainly and completely the way he had always told her things, and he listened with the same focused attention he always gave to what she said. When she finished, he was quiet for a while. "The documents," he said. "They are with Wilson." "Yes." "And Aldridge is under arrest." "Yes," and Calhoun confessed. "And Clara is here with her girls." She paused. "Wilson wants to speak with you. He said if you come in voluntarily, he will hear you. He also said that the federal charge against you was filed by Aldridge's attorney, which makes it complicated." He absorbed this. "Complicated is not the same as gone." "No," she agreed, "but it is considerably better than it was." He looked out at the plaza. A group of children were chasing each other between the adobe buildings, and their noise was cheerful and entirely unaware of the magnitude of the past 3 days. He watched them for a moment with something in his expression that she thought might be the distant echo of a simpler time. "I should go see Wilson tonight," he said. "Tomorrow morning is soon enough," she said. "Tonight you should see Clara and eat something and sleep for a length of time longer than is strictly necessary." He turned to look at her. The evening light was kind to his face, catching the gray of his eyes and making them something close to silver. He looked at her with the unguarded expression she had seen occasionally in the firelight of the Arroyo, the one that appeared when his considerable self-containment ran out of resources to maintain itself. "Ellen," he said. She waited. "I left that bag on your porch because you were the only person I could think of to trust with it," he said. "And because I did not know how to knock on your door and ask you directly, which I recognize is a failure of character." "Why did you not know how to knock?" she said. "Because the last time I saw you," he said, "I wanted to say something and I did not, and I was not sure after that whether I had lost the opportunity or simply the nerve." He said this with the flat honesty of the man who had told her his brother had died and his sister-in-law was in danger, the same voice that did not dress things up. She looked at him. "What did you want to say?" "That I have spent 6 months thinking about you," he said. "That this was not what I intended when I came to Cimarron. That I came here to settle a debt I owed my brother, and I did not intend to find anything else, and I found you, and that has been the most complicating and important thing that has happened to me since Samuel died." The plaza was settling into its blue evening, and the children had gone in for supper, and the air smelled of pinon smoke and the adobe dust that is specific to Santa Fe and nowhere else in the world. "You could have knocked on my door," she said. "I know," he said. "I should have." She looked at him for a long moment, at this complicated, damaged, determined man who had spent 2 years on a mission of fierce and painful love for his dead brother, and who had left a saddlebag on her porch with no note because he did not know how to say directly what he meant to say. "You have another opportunity," she said. "Right now, if you want to use it." He looked at her steadily. "I want to build something," he said. "After this, after whatever happens with Wilson, I want to stop moving. I have been moving for 2 years and I am tired of it in a way that goes all the way down. I want to be somewhere real and do something real and I want—" He stopped. Then he said the hard, plain thing. "I want to know if there is any possibility that you would let me be near you, properly, not as someone passing through." She was quiet for a moment. "There is considerable possibility," she said. He breathed carefully around whatever ribs were complaining. And then he smiled, not the almost smile she had seen in October, but a full one, and it changed his face completely, made him look younger and more open than she had seen him in all their months of acquaintance, and she felt something loosen in her own chest that she had not known had been held tight. "I need to wash my face," he said, "before I say anything else." "You absolutely do," she agreed. He met with Wilson the next morning. Ellen sat in the outer office and waited, with the patience of a woman who has learned that waiting is not the same as being helpless. The meeting lasted 2 hours. When Benjamin came out, he looked like a man who has been through a serious conversation and has arrived somewhere on the other side of it. Wilson came out behind him and shook Benjamin's hand and told Ellen, in the direct way of a man who respects directness in others, that he would be recommending to the federal attorney that the charges against Benjamin Merritt be considered in the context of his cooperation in the Aldridge case and his voluntary presentation to the court. It was not an immediate resolution. These things did not move like that in 1883. The territorial legal system was slow and deliberate and connected to a federal apparatus in Washington that moved at its own pace. Wilson was honest about that, and Benjamin and Ellen were both honest with themselves about what it meant. What it meant was that Benjamin Merritt needed to stay in New Mexico territory and be available to the court and cooperate with the ongoing case, and that doing so placed him in a position of considerable legal uncertainty for a period that Wilson estimated at somewhere between 3 months and a year. What it also meant was that he was not riding away. Ellen looked at the mathematics of the situation the way she looked at all mathematics, clearly and without sentimentality. "Come back to the ranch," she said. He looked at her. "I have 40 acres and a cattle operation that is still fragile and a debt that is reduced but not eliminated. I have more work than I can do alone and a barn that has been empty since October." She kept her voice practical, because she was a practical woman and this was, genuinely, a practical proposal. It also happened to be the thing she wanted most in the world, but those two facts were not mutually exclusive. You need somewhere to be while Wilson's case moves forward. You know cattle and you know horses and you can split firewood, which I noticed in October. Come back to the ranch. He looked at her for a long moment, and she could see him reading through her practical framing to the thing beneath it, because he had always been good at reading her. "All right," he said. They left Santa Fe 3 days later, after Ellen had seen Clara Voss settled in a situation that was more stable than anything Clara had known in 2 years. Clara's daughters, the older one named Lily who was 6 and the younger one named Ruth who was 4, had arrived from their previous lodgings and were now housed with the respectable family. And Clara had employment arranged through Wilson's connections with a family in Santa Fe who needed a competent woman to manage their household accounts. Clara embraced Ellen at the departure, holding her tightly in the way of women who have been through something together that creates an immediate and permanent bond. "Come back and see us," Clara said. "We will," Ellen said. "Tell him," Clara said quietly directly into Ellen's ear, "that Samuel would be glad." Ellen told him on the second day of the ride back to Cimarron, as they were moving through high country with the spring wildflowers coming up between the rocks. She said it plainly, the way Clara had said it, and she watched Benjamin take it in and she watched the thing it did to him, which was considerable, and which he managed with characteristic quietness, turning his face away for a moment toward the mountains. When he turned back, his eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the wind. "Thank you," he said. "Clara said it, I just delivered it. Still," he said. They rode side by side through the afternoon, talking and not talking in the easy rhythm of people who have learned each other's silences as well as their words, and by the time they made camp that evening in a high meadow with the Cimarron Range dark against the stars above them, something between them had changed again, shifted to a new and closer position. After supper, sitting by the fire, he reached across and took her hand. It was simple and unhurried and entirely certain, the gesture of a man who has made a decision and intends to stand by it. His hand was large and calloused and warm, and she did not pull away but turned her hand to hold his properly, and they sat like that by the fire for a long time, not saying anything about it because nothing needed to be said. She leaned her head against his shoulder eventually, and he rested his cheek against the top of her head, and the stars above the New Mexico territory went about their ancient business and paid no attention to two people below them discovering, somewhat late in their respective days, what it felt like to be exactly where you were supposed to be. He kissed her for the first time on the porch of her ranch house, which was where it seemed right that it should happen. They had arrived back in Cimarron on a Tuesday morning, and the town received them with the specific interest of a small community that has been through a significant event and is still processing it. Thomas Aldridge's arrest had reorganized the social fabric in ways that were still being understood. Several families who had been under financial pressure suddenly found their situations reassessed as Wilson's investigators went through the bank's records. There was, in the air of Cimarron, the particular atmosphere of a place that has been carrying a hidden weight and has had it removed, and is not quite sure yet how to stand without it. Ellen and Benjamin rode through town at a pace that was neither hurrying nor dawdling, and Ellen noted with satisfaction that the expressions turned toward them were, on balance, more curious than hostile. At the ranch, she opened the house while he saw to the horses, and when he came up the porch steps she was standing in the door with 2 cups of coffee, and he took his cup, and they stood on the porch in the morning light looking out at her land, which was coming into its spring color with the wildflowers she had planted along the fence line the first year she arrived. He had said something simple and true about the land looking good, and she had said she knew, and then he had set his coffee cup on the porch rail and turned to her and cupped her face in both hands and kissed her with a gentleness that surprised her, because she had been expecting something more urgent, and what she got instead was something careful and thorough and entirely focused on her. When he pulled back, she looked at him. "You have been thinking about doing that for a while," she said. "Since November," he admitted. "November. You waited until April. I told you it was a failure of character. I am reconsidering my earlier position on that," she said. He kissed her again, less gently this time, and she put her free hand against his chest and felt his heart, which was beating faster than its usual measured pace. This seemed to her to be both fair and accurate. In the weeks that followed, the ranch became something it had not been in Ellen's 3 years of working it alone, a place where 2 people's efforts compounded instead of one person's efforts running thin. Benjamin worked with the kind of focused physical energy that Ellen recognized as the other side of the same coin that made him relentless in his pursuit of Aldridge, and he learned quickly, which she had expected, and he worked without needing direction on familiar tasks, which she appreciated more than she told him, at least initially. They developed a daily rhythm that felt, Ellen thought, like something being built intentionally rather than accumulated accidentally. They were up before dawn and divided the work between them with an efficiency born of 2 people who both understood land work and were not interested in hierarchy for its own sake. They talked at meals and in the evening, and their conversations ranged widely, the way they always had, from the specific problems of the ranch to the larger questions of the territory, to the smaller intimate territories of each other's past and character. He told her things he had not told her in November, things that were harder to say, about the years after Samuel came west and Benjamin stayed in Missouri and spent 3 years being the wrong kind of young man before following his brother to New Mexico. About the first time he had done something specifically outside the law, which had not been for money or excitement but for a specific practical reason connected to a specific injustice, and about the way that first time had made it easier to justify subsequent times, which was the honest and somewhat uncomfortable truth about how a person becomes what he becomes. She told him about Gerald Harper, more fully than she had told anyone, including the parts she was not proud of. About ignoring things she had sensed, because she wanted the life Gerald was promising. About the year when she had known, somewhere below the part of herself that was willing to know it, that the accounting was not adding up and had not asked directly. About the specific shame of discovering that her own willingness to not look clearly had contributed to her own deceiving. He listened to this without judgment, in the way he listened to everything, and said only, "You were 22 when you married him." "That is not an excuse," she said. "No," he agreed. "But it is a fact worth including in the accounting." She looked at him. "Is that what you do with yourself, include the facts?" "I try to," he said. "I do not always succeed." "Neither do I," she said. There was a particular comfort in this. Not the comfort of having things smoothed over, but the comfort of being seen clearly and neither judged nor excused for it. She had not, she realized, felt that specific comfort before. The legal situation resolved over the following months in the incremental, procedural way that law moves in a territory that is still in the process of becoming itself. Thomas Aldridge pleaded to a reduced set of charges in August of 1883, in a negotiation that involved his testimony about the Callaway Cattle Company's practices, which Wilson had been more interested in anyway. The Callaway Company settled with the territorial court, and a number of affected families received some portion of compensation, never full and never entirely fair, but more than nothing. Deputy Calhoun was stripped of his star and sentenced to 18 months, which was lighter than he deserved, but was what the evidence supported in the specific charge that stuck. The federal matter concerning Benjamin Merritt was resolved in September, when Wilson filed a formal recommendation with the federal attorney's office that the charges be dismissed in consideration of Merritt's substantial cooperation in the Aldridge case. The recommendation was accepted. A notice arrived on a Wednesday in the third week of September, brought by a courier from Santa Fe, and Benjamin held the paper for a long moment in the afternoon light of Ellen's kitchen and did not say anything for long enough that she came around the table and stood beside him. "It is done," she said. "It is done," he said. She took the paper from him and read it herself and then set it down on the table and looked at him. "Then you are free," she said. He looked back at her with those gray eyes. "I have felt free since May," he said, "since you told me to come back to this ranch." She did not argue with the sentiment, but she noted, privately, how much it meant to have the paper. To have it finished in writing, resolved and official, closed. Because she was a woman who had learned about the importance of things in writing, and she was not going to minimize what it meant to have the legal story of Benjamin Merritt concluded in his favor and documented. He proposed to her in October, on an evening that happened to be the one-year anniversary of their first conversation in the main street of Cimarron over a loose horseshoe, though neither of them noted the coincidence until later. They were sitting on the porch in the last of the autumn warmth, with the sky going red behind the mountains, and he was not particularly elegant about it. He did not kneel, which she did not require, and he did not make a speech, which she would have found suspicious. He said simply that he loved her and that he wanted to marry her, and that he understood if she needed more time but that he was ready whenever she was. She said yes. The wedding was in November, at the Cimarron church where Pastor Hollis had unlocked the back gate 6 months earlier and asked no questions. Clara Voss came from Santa Fe with her daughters and stood with Ellen, and the two girls in their good dresses were the best attendants imaginable. Dorothea Vance, Ellen's neighbor, brought a cake she had been planning for 2 months. About 30 people from the community came, including several whose situations had been improved by the fall of Thomas Aldridge, and who felt, therefore, that they had a personal stake in the occasion. Benjamin wore a clean dark coat and a collar that was properly pressed, and he stood at the front of that small church and looked at Ellen walking toward him with an expression of such open, unguarded feeling that Dorothea Vance, standing in the third row, had to locate her handkerchief immediately. Ellen wore a dress of deep blue wool that she had bought in Santa Fe, and that she would wear on significant occasions for the next 20 years. She walked up the aisle without anyone to give her away, because she was giving herself, which seemed to her to be the accurate description of what was happening, and she looked at Benjamin's face at the front of the church and felt, with a fullness that she had not expected from her own heart, that she was exactly where she was supposed to be. They said the words that were required to be said, and Pastor Hollis, with the good sense he had already demonstrated, was mercifully brief with his portion. When Benjamin kissed her in front of those 30 people, Clara's daughter Lily applauded, and after a moment so did everyone else, and the sound of it echoed off the wooden walls of that small church and out into the November morning. The winter of 1883 into 1884 was a good one for the Harper Merritt Ranch, which was what they called it on the deed when they had it rewritten in January. The cattle operation, stabilized by Benjamin's work through the previous spring and summer, produced better numbers than any year since Ellen had taken it over. They cleared the last of Gerald Harper's debt in February, a moment that Ellen celebrated by sitting at the kitchen table and doing the same calculation she had done in the black months of the previous October and arriving at a different answer, and then setting down her pencil and looking across the table at her husband. Benjamin was reading a letter from Clara, who wrote regularly and in detail, including drawings by Lily, who was developing an early inclination toward art. He looked up when Ellen put her pencil down. "Zero," she said. He looked at her. "The debt," she said. "It is zero." He put the letter down and came around the table and kissed her without saying anything, which was the right response. In the spring of 1884, Ellen told him she was expecting a child. She told him on a morning in March, practical and direct, because those were her ways, and she watched his face do something she had seen it do only a few times before, that specific unguarded opening that broke through his natural containment. He said, "Are you well?" "Perfectly well," she said. He said, "Good," and held her carefully, with his hands spread on her back as if he were making a promise to something larger than himself. Their son was born in November of 1884, a cold, clear November morning when the Cimarron Range was already snow-capped, and the air in the bedroom had a bite to it that Benjamin dealt with by keeping the fire stoked through the entire night before. Dorothea Vance attended the birth, as she had attended most births in the area for the past 15 years, with a no-nonsense competence that Ellen found intensely reassuring. Benjamin spent the hours before the birth in the kitchen, where he drank a great deal of coffee and split considerably more firewood than the situation strictly required. When Dorothea brought him in, the room was warm and quiet, and Ellen was in the bed with the baby wrapped in the blanket that Clara had sent from Santa Fe 6 months earlier, a good wool blanket in the cream and red of the Merritt family's old Missouri home, which Clara had made herself. Benjamin looked at his son's face for a long, silent moment. Then he looked at Ellen. "Samuel," he said. It was a question and a statement at once. "Samuel," she agreed. She watched him absorb this, the name and the face and the weight of what they meant together, and she saw it move through him like light through water, reaching the places that had been dark for 2 years, and she understood that some portion of the wound that Clara had identified was, if not healed, then changed into something that could be lived with rather than simply endured. Little Samuel Merritt was not a quiet baby. He was opinionated and loud from his first week, and he grew into a boy with his father's gray eyes, and his mother's implacable stubbornness, and his own particular charm, which he deployed without apparent awareness that it was unusual. He followed Benjamin around the ranch from the time he could walk, and Benjamin taught him everything he knew about horses and land and work and honesty, in the same unhurried way he had learned everything himself. Clara Voss visited in the summer of 1885 with Lily and Ruth, and the visit lasted 2 weeks. Ellen watched Benjamin with those girls, patient and gentle, becoming in practice the uncle he had always been in intention, and she thought about how much of a person's life is shaped by the forces that seem like obstacles and turn out to be the root. In the fall of 1885, they found a document. It arrived in a packet from Wilson's office in Santa Fe, the final resolution of the Aldridge estate case, and it included a finding about Samuel Merritt's original loan from the bank, specifically that the loan had been manufactured with fraudulent deed documentation, and that any subsequent transactions based on that fraudulent deed were legally void. This meant that the foreclosure of Samuel Merritt's ranch near Mora was retroactively invalid, and that the property, which had since been resold by Callaway to a family named Torres, was the subject of a compensation claim. The compensation was not large, but it was real. Benjamin and Clara spent 3 letters working out what to do with it, conducted across the distance between Cimarron and Santa Fe, with the kind of correspondence that contains whole conversations between the lines. In the end, they put it toward a small investment in a plot of land adjacent to the Torr's property, which was not Samuel's land restored but was something else. New ground, held in the name of his daughters. Ellen watched Benjamin sign the papers for this transaction at their kitchen table, and she set down the coffee cup in front of him and sat across from him and looked at his face. "Is it enough?" she asked. "Not about the money or the land, about all of it." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "It is not the same as him being alive, but yes, it is enough." She nodded. "You were the one who made it possible," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I had the evidence, but I could not have gotten it to Wilson. You rode out to find me, and you went into Cimarron, and you got Clara out, and you faced down those riders on the Santa Fe road, all of it. Without you, that bag sitting on your porch was just a bag." "Without you, there was no bag," she said. "That is a much smaller contribution," he said. She looked at him steadily. "I opened a saddlebag," she said. "You spent 2 years building what was in it. Let us agree that we each contributed the parts that the other could not and call it even." He almost smiled. "The part where you rode out to find me," he said. "I want to be clear that I was not expecting that." "I know," she said. "You left it with no note. If you had left a note explaining what you wanted me to do, I would have had the option of deciding sensibly. As it was, I had to ride out to find you to understand the situation, which was your error in planning." He did smile now fully and reached across the table and took her hand. "My error in planning turned out well. It turned out well despite you," she said, "not because of you." "That is an accurate description of several important things in my life," he said. She laughed, and his hand tightened on hers across the kitchen table, and outside the window the Cimarron range was bright in the autumn afternoon, and the cattle were moving in the lower pasture, and little Samuel was shouting something at the dog near the barn in a tone that indicated the dog was not cooperating. Benjamin glanced toward the window. "The dog is in the chicken yard again." "It is always in the chicken yard," Ellen said. "Samuel encourages it." "Samuel thinks the chickens and the dog should be friends," Benjamin said. "They are not going to be friends." "No," he agreed. "But I appreciate his optimism." She looked at him. "He gets it from you." He looked back at her, and she could see the question in his expression, the mild and genuine surprise of a man who had not thought of himself as an optimist. "You have been optimistic about this," she said, indicating the kitchen table and the window and the ranch and herself and everything that was encompassed by the gesture. "From the moment you told me I was going to be all right." He was quiet for a moment. "I was not sure I was right about that when I said it." "I know," she said. "You said it anyway." He looked at her hand in his on the table. "I am sure now," he said. She pressed his hand. "So am I." Their daughter was born in the spring of 1887. They named her Frances, after Ellen's mother, who had died in Kansas when Ellen was 16, and who had been. Ellen had told Benjamin once on a November night 2 years before they were married, the most capable woman she had ever known, which was a statement that Benjamin understood to be significant. Frances arrived in the world with her mother's dark hair, and a set of opinions that she made known immediately, and continued to make known without apology for the rest of her life. Samuel, who was 2.5 by then, and had been informed that a baby was coming with varying degrees of enthusiasm over the preceding months, examined his sister with the scientific attention of a boy who is genuinely interested in new phenomena and announced that she was small. "She will not stay small," Benjamin told him. "Will she be able to help with the horses?" "Eventually." Samuel seemed to find this acceptable. The years that followed were full ones, in the way that years on a working ranch with 2 children and a complicated and interesting marriage are full. There was always more work than time, and there were seasons that were hard and seasons that were generous, and there were conversations at the kitchen table that went late into the night, and decisions that had to be made about land and cattle and the children's futures, all of which they made together with the same direct, honest, sometimes argumentative process that they had established in the very first weeks of their acquaintance. Benjamin became, over time, a man whom the Cimarron community knew and trusted in a way that was separate from and gradually more prominent than his earlier reputation, which faded in the way that reputations do when the context that created them has been thoroughly discredited. He was known as a man who knew horses, who could be relied upon, who would say what he thought and meant what he said. These were considered considerable virtues in the territory. Ellen became the woman she had been becoming before Gerald Harper's debts had nearly derailed the process. A landowner of real standing, someone whose opinion on the management of the land and the management of civic matters was sought and valued. She served on the school board for 3 years and was instrumental in hiring a teacher who stayed for 6 years, which was considered remarkable, and she corresponded regularly with Judge Cray's office about land rights issues that continued to arise as the territory moved toward statehood. Clara Voss married a Santa Fe lawyer named Edward Farrow in 1886, a quiet, steady man who was clearly and genuinely devoted to her. Ellen and Benjamin attended the wedding with Samuel, who at the age of 2 was an energetic participant in the event, and at one point escaped from his mother's grip and was discovered under the refreshment table. Clara laughed about this for years. Edward Farrow, for his part, was the kind of man who finds a 2-year-old under the refreshment table charming rather than alarming, which told Ellen everything she needed to know about his suitability for Clara. The Wells Fargo transfer document from the Saddlebag, which had been central to Wilson's case against Aldridge, came back to Ellen eventually, after the case was fully closed, as a piece of evidence no longer required. She kept it. Not because it had legal value, but because it was, in a way, the document that had started everything. She kept it in the box where she kept the important papers, next to the deed to the ranch, and the children's birth records and the photograph. The photograph. She had kept that too, of course. The studio photograph of Benjamin and Clara that Benjamin had carried in the saddlebag, the one with the 4 words on the back that had sent her riding out in the early morning with her hands shaking. She is not safe. She looked at it occasionally over the years and thought about the morning she had found the bag on her porch and the particular quality of the decision she had made in 30 seconds, and how entirely that decision had reoriented her life. She thought about the kind of courage that is not really courage at all, but is simply the refusal to pretend you do not know what you know, and the refusal to stay still when something matters. She had not stayed still. She had opened the bag and ridden out to find him. It was, she reflected, the most important thing she had ever done, more important than holding the ranch together through that terrible winter. More important than the conversation with Wilson. Important in the specific way that things are important when they are also irreversible, when the road you took is the only road that gets you where you are, and where you are is exactly right. She was at her kitchen table on an evening in the autumn of 1889, with the lamp lit and the children in bed and the comfortable sounds of the ranch settling for the night around her, when Benjamin came in from the last rounds and sat down across from her and looked at what she was writing, which was a letter to Clara. "Tell her Samuel can ride properly now," he said. "I was going to," she said. "And that Frances has decided she prefers the horses to the cattle, and I consider that a correct assessment. Frances has better taste than Samuel at this stage," Ellen agreed. He poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove and sat back down. He looked, as he had looked for the past 6 years, like a man who had found the place he was supposed to be and had no inclination to be anywhere else. The lines of his face were deeper than they had been in 1882, and his hair had the first small additions of gray at the temples, and Ellen thought he looked better for all of it, the way things look better when they have been through something and remain themselves. He was looking at her with the particular attention he had given her from the beginning, the kind that saw clearly and meant it. "What are you thinking about?" he said. "The saddlebag," she said. He raised an eyebrow. "I was thinking about opening it," she said. "That morning, the shaking." "You were shaking." "My hands, yes. I was not going to mention it at the time." "I did not know that," he said. He considered this. I left it without a note because I could not think what to write that was not either too little or too much. You should have written something, she said, even a small something. I know, he said. I have thought about it many times. What I should have written was, I need you. Come find me. She looked at him across the kitchen table, across the lamplight and the coffee and the 6 years of their life together and all the things that had been built in that time. That is exactly what you should have written, she said. He reached across the table and took her hand, the same gesture he had made in that first camp in the Arroyo, the same certainty in it after all this time. You came anyway, he said. I always would have, she said. If I had understood what was in the bag, I always would have. I know, he said. Outside, the New Mexico territory went about its ancient business under stars that were thick and bright and entirely indifferent to the concerns of the people below them. The Cimarron Range was a dark presence against the sky. The horses were quiet in the barn. The children were asleep with the deep, uncomplicated sleep of children who are warm and fed and safe, which was the best thing any parent could know. Benjamin Merritt sat at Ellen Harper's kitchen table in the house that was also his house, on the land that was also his land, across from the woman who had opened an unmarked saddlebag one April morning and made a decision in 30 seconds that had changed everything. And he held her hand across the worn wood of the table, and the lamp made everything amber and close and real. She looked at him. He looked at her. This was what they had built, the two of them, out of secrets and betrayal and dark pasts, and a hidden motive and a forced choice, and an ultimate sacrifice, and a saddlebag left on a porch with no note. Out of a man who could not say directly what he needed until a woman riding toward the danger of it gave him the opportunity to say it plainly. Out of two people who had each, in their own way, learned the cost of not being honest, and had decided to be honest with each other instead, whatever it cost, and had discovered that the cost was not what they feared, and what they got in return was everything. There was a letter to finish, and morning would come early, and the ranch required what the ranch required, and this was their life, practical and full and entirely their own. Ellen squeezed his hand and picked up her pen. Tell her anything else, she said. He thought about it. Tell her we are well, he said. Tell her we are very well. She wrote it down. It was the truest thing either of them had said in years, and they had said a great many true things. Outside, the night was enormous and full of stars, and inside the lamp burned steady and warm, and Benjamin Merritt and Ellen Harper sat together at their kitchen table at the edge of the frontier, and were, as he had said on a dusty October street over a loose horseshoe nearly 7 years before, going to be all right. More than all right. They were at last completely and irrevocably home.